When you think about it, every single movement in history, whether it's a revolution or a tech startup, it all starts with a core team. But how do you pick the right people, especially when your mission is, well, to change the entire world? So today we're going to get into how Jesus of Nazareth put together his inner circle, and why his very first picks immediately lit a fuse and started a major controversy.
I mean, it's just one of those universal truths, right? You can have the most brilliant idea, a vision that could change everything, but it stays just a thought until people actually start to get on board. And that journey, from one person's voice to a movement, that's exactly what we're going to look at today.
So where did this all begin? Seriously, if you were trying to launch a world-changing religious philosophy back then, where would you even start looking for your team? The temple, maybe? The fancy schools run by the rabbis? Okay, let's dive into this.
And this is where things get, well, really interesting. Look at the contrast here. You'd totally expect a new religious leader to recruit from the A-list, the scribes, the priests, the scholars. But Jesus? Nope. He goes down to the docks and attacks booths. He chooses fishermen, a tax collector everyone despised, basically the people no one else was looking at. This choice wasn't some accident. It was a powerful statement. I mean, talk about a masterclass in disruptive team building, right? He's valuing raw potential over some polished resume.
All right, so our story kicks off not in some grand temple or a fancy library, but right there on the shore of a lake. This is Act 1, the call. Just try to picture this for a second. You've got a crew of professional fishermen, guys like Simon Peter and his partners, and they are cleaning their nets after pulling an all-nighter. The problem, they caught 0 fish, nothing. You can just feel the exhaustion, the frustration. Their boats are empty, and this is how they make a living. It was a total failure.
So Jesus, who's pretty much a stranger, borrows Simon's boat to teach the crowds from the water. And after he's done, he tells this expert fisherman, hey, go back out there and try again. I mean, you can practically hear the exhaustion and the skepticism in Simon's voice. Look, we've tried all night, but if you say so, I'll do it. It's this tiny little spark of trust in the face of, a whole career's worth of doubt.
And the result? It is absolutely overwhelming. We're not talking about just a good catch. This is a catch so ridiculously massive, it fills 2 boats to the breaking point. I mean, we're talking literally sinking under the weight of all these fish. This clearly isn't just a lucky break. This is something else entirely.
Now, Simon Peter's reaction, it's not what you'd expect. He's not celebrating or thinking about all the money he just made. It's pure awe and fear. In the face of this incredible power, all he can feel is his own unworthiness. And you see this a lot in the Bible, actually. When a regular person has an encounter with the divine, there's this sudden, almost crushing awareness of their own flaws.
But this is the crucial pivot point. Jesus doesn't say, "You're right, see ya." Instead, he flips the script on Peter's whole identity. He says, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." See, Jesus doesn't see that confession of unworthiness as a deal breaker. No, he sees it as the perfect starting point for his mission. It's such a powerful lesson in leadership. Authentic self-awareness is way more valuable than pretending to be perfect. So he's called his first team members with an incredible miracle. Now what? Well, now he starts to demonstrate the authority behind that call.
Okay, so we've got to get some context here because it's super important. Dr. Daniel Darko really helps us understand this. For people living in Jesus' time, miracles weren't like something out of a sci-fi movie. Their whole culture was built on these incredible stories of God intervening in the world, parting the Red Sea, you name it. They actually expected God to show up and act. So for them, the question wasn't, can miracles happen? It was, okay, who has the authority from God to do this?
A perfect example of this is the healing of the leper. You have this man, a total social outcast because of his skin condition, and he comes up to Jesus. First, Jesus does something shocking. He touches him. And this is a huge risk, by the way. According to the law, that should make Jesus himself unclean. But the opposite happens. Instead of Jesus becoming unclean, the man becomes clean. And then what does Jesus do? He tells the guy to go follow the established law and show himself to the priests. So he's showing his power over the system, but he's also playing within its rules to validate what he's done. It's brilliant, really.
And you can probably guess what happens next. When you start claiming that kind of authority, you're gonna run into some opposition. And that brings us to Act 3, the clash.
And the people who cared most about this stuff were the Pharisees. Now look, it's really easy to just cast them as the bad guys, but it's way more complicated than that. These were devout people, deeply respected in their communities.
They believed with all their hearts that if they could just follow God's law perfectly, it would bring about righteousness and the coming of the Messiah. Their whole goal, as they saw it, was to guard theological correctness.
So, the scene is set. It's this house, and it is packed to the gills with people. And there's this paralyzed man whose friends are so desperate and have so much faith, they literally start digging a hole through the roof to lower him down right in front of Jesus. And of course, the Pharisees are there watching every move.
So what's the very first thing Jesus says to this guy? He doesn't say anything about his legs. He looks right at him and addresses his soul. He just says, "Man, your sins are forgiven you."
And for the Pharisees in the room, ding, 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 that is a massive red flag. For them, this is blasphemy, pure and simple. In their entire understanding of God and the universe, only God had the authority to forgive sins. You can just see them thinking, who on earth does this man think he is?
But Jesus, he knows exactly what they're thinking. And he basically puts a question back to them. Hey, which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk? I mean, think about it. Anyone can say your sins are forgiven. You can't see it happen, right? It's an invisible claim. But to prove he has the authority to do the invisible thing, he does the visible thing. He tells the man to get up and walk, and he does. He doesn't just tell them he has authority, he shows them.
But if you think that was controversial, Jesus is just getting started. He then doubles down. He walks right up to a tax collector named Levi, a guy who was seen not just as a sinner, but as a traitor working for the Roman occupiers, and says, "Follow me." And not only does he call him, he goes to a party at his house, a party filled with other tax collectors and people labeled as sinners. You can imagine the Pharisees are just beside themselves. For them, holiness meant keeping separate from sin and sinners. It was about creating a clean, protected community. So they go to Jesus' disciples and ask, "Why on earth is your teacher eating with this crowd?"
Well, Jesus overhears them, and his answer is basically his entire mission statement packed into one sentence. He says he's like a doctor. A doctor doesn't waste their time with healthy people, they go to where the sick people are. He's saying his whole purpose isn't to hang out with people who already think they're righteous, but to call the people everyone else has written off as sinners. He's defining his mission not by who he excludes, but by who he intentionally includes.
And that really brings us to the core question of this whole story, doesn't it? Who gets to define what's right? Is it the people who meticulously keep the rules, the guardians of tradition, like the Pharisees believed? Or is it the one who breaks all the social and religious boundaries to be a friend to the so-called sinner? That was the controversy Jesus sparked from day one, and it's a question that still echoes today.